Okay, Dr. Michelle, I think we are live. How's it going?
Hi, how are you?
Doing great. And thanks for being here first off. I'm really excited to talk to you because like as I was just saying before we started recording, what I've read about you, you have a lot going on. You wear a lot of different hats, correct? Have you always been that way?
Yes. It's funny because I was just talking to somebody and I'm going to be like in a social situation. And I always cringe because people say, "What do you do?" And I sit there and I'm like, do I really tell everything? Because does it look like showing off or like, right? Or is it going to, and sometimes it could overwhelm people too.
Sure.
And sometimes it induces insecurity, I have to say, right? So I really walk a fine line sometimes and have to really think about how I want to show myself.
Yeah, I mean, you shouldn't. I mean, I get that because that people are, I mean, I'm generally speaking, of course, quick to judge now, right? And that's a good point that you brought about being insecure. Like, because when people start to, you know, put off their or label off their titles, I guess people were just like, oh, well, I haven't done anything with my life. Maybe I shouldn't even be in the same room as this person.
Mm.
And, and I don't know if that's just nature
Hmm.
or if that's just imposter syndrome or whatever you want to say. Because, there's, and speaking of imposter syndrome, I mean, I get a couple things like that, with my CrossFit competitions and stuff. Like it creeps up on me that, oh man, you shouldn't even be here doing this right now, and that might be a bad analogy, but yeah, but I get what you're saying that like you want to kind of.
Well, because I am so passionate about everything that I do.
Sure.
So literally when I talk about it, you could like feel the passion in my body. Like I'm just like, rah, when I talk about it, there's like so much. So it could be like, I always worry that I'm a little too much for some people, and I am too much for some people. And that's okay. Like I don't apologize for it. Like I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Now I am totally comfortable with that. And I know like I'm not for everybody and everyone's not for me. That's life, right?
Yeah, and that's what a lot of people need to accept because a lot
Yeah.
of people feel that they should be. Everybody wants everybody to like them, and I get that. But it's just like you said, it's human nature. Not everybody's going to like everybody.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, when people are anxious about that, it's really interesting. I say to them, like when I'm in session with somebody, because a lot of people have social insecurity and totally makes sense, right? And I'll say to them, "Do you like everybody? Do you really like everybody? Do you have judgments about others?"
Oh.
Yeah. I go, "Oh, so how does this work? Like you don't have to like everybody, but everyone needs to like you."
Mhm.
That's interesting. And then they're like, "Oh yeah, I didn't think about that."
I watched your TED talk, and I think you even you crowned yourself as the anxiety lady, or people called
Yes.
you that. Is that
Yes.
what it
Yes.
was? Yeah.
Yes.
Is that just because of your background and?
I deal with so many, clients that I work with that
Yeah.
have anxiety. It's just something that I really love working with anxious people.
Mm.
Yeah, I do. It's definitely a specialty of mine, but I actually really enjoy it only because I feel like the tools and skills that I teach them, and the psychoeducation that I give to them around our thinking
Sure.
is so enlightening and it's so helpful. And I have to tell you, I've seen the most incredible transformations in people that are mind blowing. And I've seen I see a lot of like teens and young adults, and I've seen them over a period of years. So I really saw them through their development, and I'm just like amazed at where they've gone to because of just being accepting of themselves. Bringing them to a place of understanding themselves better and accepting themselves, and having self compassion and working towards empowering themselves, which is everything my book is about. But the places that people could go if they believe in themselves is like off the charts, really.
I got a lot of thoughts that I want to ask or questions that I want to ask. I hope I don't mess them up. But the first one, I guess, with working with anxiety
Uh-huh.
patients, and I think you see people of all ages, correct?
I do. I don't tend, at least now, to see young kids, but I would say about like, middle school and up.
Okay. But I guess, first, I mean, in the modern world today, I mean, are we seeing more cases of anxiety compared to
Oh, yeah.
previous years, I guess?
Yes. Yeah. Well, particularly with COVID.
Ooh.
Yeah, particularly with COVID. It's interesting because people who were anxious, or especially socially anxious, appreciated COVID.
Because they didn't have to go out.
it allowed them to avoid. It was like a perfect storm. Are you kidding? They loved it. Yeah, loved it. And for those who tend to be more social, and extroverted, it was really, really painfully difficult for
Sure.
them, which makes a lot of sense if you think about it.
It does. Yeah, I never even thought about it like that, but it does make perfect sense.
Well, and if you think about those who were socially anxious that appreciated COVID, guess what happened now
Uh-oh.
when all of a sudden, right, all the restrictions
Uh-huh.
are lifted? Guess what comes back?
It all came back.
And and a banshee, right? Because they were allowed to avoid, and now all of a sudden, boom, right? Like they're thrown into this situation where they have to really be up and center with their anxiety, and it's really challenging. Plus, if just there was so much going on in terms of like financially for families
Sure.
and otherwise, so it really wreaked marriages falling apart. I mean, I could go on and on, right? Like substance use and abuse and deaths because of substance abuse skyrocketed,
I read that.
depression, and so like I saw astronomical levels of anxiety in kids, especially. Yeah, really astronomical. Because kids are pretty sheltered, but like now in today's day and age, and I don't know how old you are, but like growing up, I didn't have to worry about like pandemics and like
Yeah.
school shootings and like all these, like
Yeah, I'm a young 36, so that yeah,
I'm a lot older, so
it's okay. I would have never guessed that, but I thought we were pretty close. But
God bless you.
but no, I mean I agree because growing up that with 9/11 here just a few days ago, I mean we were having a conversation with my family just like, hey, do you even remember? It's that thing.
Yeah.
Remember where you were at? And everyone always remembers where they're at. The same way with I guess the JFK assassination and then MLK and stuff like that. Um. But yeah, there for a while. I mean, there was a meme out there. It's just, hey, can we just stop living every month with a new historical event? Like, can we just calm down for a little bit? But yeah, growing up, it was just, and I came from a very rural area and there was anything,
Oh.
like to stop the world or stop you from living how your life was, So I couldn't imagine what it was like even being born during quarantine and the life, like where you have to, even I work in higher education. Well, I do for a couple more weeks anyway.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, for taking classes, not in the traditional sense, all
College students. Do you know how many? Again, this was really, I would have to say, really wasn't a lot. I mean, often in the social media, but I teach at NYU, and I also see a lot of college students, remotely, a lot of them. And do you know how many suicides there were in colleges?
no,
Oh, tremendous, tremendous. Yeah. People don't know about it. I was getting the emails, because they send to faculty emails about what's going on.
sure,
We're talking about, right, more internally. There was so much going on. You can't even imagine. I remember I had a patient that I was seeing one night. I'll never forget this. And she sent me like remotely pictures. There was two students that committed suicide in the same evening. And, they made these memorial, obviously, kind of and it was just like out of control in all the schools across the board. There was a lot of depression, and like I said, that I teach, I was going, first I was doing it remotely, and then which again is such a different experience. And then I was going into class, but with a mask.
Mm.
And I have to tell you, I preferred to do it remotely because I could see, I couldn't remember, like I'm a very visual person.
Sure.
Do you know that by the end of the semester, I knew nobody's name
I don't doubt it.
because I couldn't see their face.
Right.
I didn't feel connection to my students. And I teach a mindfulness class, and we do like really intense experiential exercises.
Yeah.
The connection was missing. It was awful.
Yeah. Well, not even that. It's hard to read people's, like you just said, faces, and that a lot of what you're saying is nonverbal anyway. I forgot what the percentages, and then like. What are you doing behind the mask? Are you smiling? Are you mad at me for what I just said?
Yeah.
And it's I don't want this to be on like a COVID soapbox, but I mean it's good because just like what you just said with the suicides, I would have never, I knew about the substance abuse going up and drugs going up, and then gun sales went up, but I didn't know suicides went up. But
suicide rates were up as well.
And and I'm very, yeah, that's right, they did go up too. Yeah, but I'm very, I guess, blessed or fortunate, whatever you want to say, just because for pandemic or quarantine for me was just literally go wear a face mask, and I was still able to go to my gym, still go to work, and
Hmm.
just go put on a face mask if I went to the grocery store. And
Hmm.
and I remember thinking that, with all the information that we have today, as far as podcasts and movies and news and TVs, like, how fortunate I was compared to, people in New York City who were like quarantined in their one
Yeah.
room bedrooms or
Yeah.
apartments or whatever you want to say. And they weren't, life came to a halt, like literally for them.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. And I couldn't imagine what that would be like looking at, and like, I try to put myself in and see other people or viewpoints in their shoes, I guess. Hopefully I said that right. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So anxiety in general, there's such a high prevalence of anxiety. It's one of, again, when we talk about mental health disorders, right? It is again, it's the top leading mental health disorder. There's all different types of anxiety disorders, and it's so prevalent. And the reason for that, which makes a lot of sense, is because there's so much working against us that puts us in a position of being anxious. And I'm talking about social, culturally, like in every realm that you could think of, the way that our brain is structured,
Sure.
cognitively and neurologically. I could go on and on. So, like this new book that I wrote is predicated, like a lot of it is dedicated to understanding like what the barriers are.
Mm.
Just because of the way we live and the way we function and the way we're wired and on and on and on, that we're innately kind of set up in some ways to fail.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, depending on, if you look at it in this standpoint, just within higher education or
Mhm.
that the social norm or narrative that, growing up, that for me it was anyway, go to school, get as much education as you can, you'll be successful, live out your life, and then you're done. But, that always life, throws you curveballs, and it always doesn't work like that way. So if you don't meet these certain standards or whatever, obviously, depending on who your parents are, like you said, the environment you're growing up in,
Mhm.
that I could see the stress it was causing. I mean, I remember
Yeah.
there was an article that came out, I think it was in San Francisco, that, kids were jumping off the bridge just because they were not meeting up to their standards of their parents or something. And I'll probably butcher that really bad, but it was something to that nature.
Yeah.
Wow. And I just couldn't imagine the pressure that's put on,
Yeah.
people at those ages right now. It's
Well, if you think about it too, we're judged by performance.
sure.
Yeah. If we're not productive and we're not succeeding, and performing,
Mm-hmm.
judged as being lazy or unmotivated or whatever you want to call it, right? Like we're always we're always moving and grooving, right? Like the idea of like I said, the mindfulness, the idea of just like kind of being still and being present and pausing, like that's just not in our culture.
Sure.
That's not in our culture. And again, it differs obviously from different parts of the country, I think, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I'm from New York. So and we're very fast paced. And like
All
you go,
about
and when you go out of New York, people always are like, "You're from New York, aren't you?"
it.
They know, they could like smell you from like outside the country just because of our nature, and and our brain is always wired to like protect,
Mm-hmm.
right? And to eliminate any kind of discomfort.
Yeah.
So we're always trying to do like what's comfortable,
Sure.
right? Yeah, and to repeat some of that. So it puts us in a position of like this, you know, toxic positivity and happiness trap and whatever you want to call it. We're constantly like, putting ourselves in this doom. And our brain is kind of wired that way, which is what the TED Talk was about,
Yeah.
right? Like we're always constantly in this space of emotional avoidance.
Yeah. That's one of the things that I was thinking about while, watching that video of yours, that, you're expected to be at a, like, hey, you're going to work, and I'm at a 10 all day, and that, life is great. Nothing's hurting or bothering me. And then like, if you were to say something different other than, when you're walking down the hall and, what are the, everyone's like, hey, how's it going? You're supposed to say either fine or great, right? But if you say anything like having a shitty day, people are like, wait, what? They don't know how to react. And then you're just like, wanting to express actually how you feel rather than hide it behind your,
Yeah.
if you want to say you're wearing a mask.
Yeah. I'll give you such a great example. I just, right before I got on this, podcast, I was I was having a session with a teenager who very, very unexpectedly and tragically lost her father.
Mm.
He like had a massive heart attack. Again, so unexpected, which is horrible, right? Can't get worse than that. But again, speaking to what we're saying, and again, this is very raw for her. And she's not a very emotive, like expressive kid. right? And it just so happens that her father, which is again very untraditional, but her father was a stay-at-home dad, and her mother, was the one who was like working the long hours and whatever. Now the dad was the one who died, which is, even like again in terms of the loss, right?
Yeah.
But what came up, which was so interesting. I asked her, like, does she get support? Does she talk to her friends? Does her friends talk to her about it? And what it came down to is they don't know what to say to me. I don't know what to say to them. I don't want to, again, she called it, trauma dumping, which is a big terminology now. People talk about trauma dumping.
Trauma dumping?
Yeah. Yeah. I've been hearing that so much lately. Yeah. And she even said it. I was like, gosh, you teenagers know about this. It's so fascinating.
Wait, so what is it?
It's basically like dumping your trauma on somebody. Yeah.
Like spilling out your like venting or something.
Yeah, but it's done in a way where, like an inappropriate way where you're almost like too much information.
Okay.
Where you're either making the person uncomfortable or, yeah.
It's like really heavy stuff and
yes.
Okay.
Yes, like really heavy stuff.
Got you.
So she's like, I'm not going to trauma dump, and I said, well, maybe we could look at this a little bit differently. So I said, what would happen? Right? What would happen if you actually did? Because there's one way of looking at it, like you're trauma dumping, you're actually imposing on somebody. I said, but can it also be a connection that you're forging in a relationship? Because the person gets to know you better. The person understands your innermost thoughts and feelings, right? Yeah, there's a real connection that gets forged when you're sharing. It's not just trauma dumping, right? So then I said, what would happen if you actually did share? What would happen? How would the person see you? How would they view you? And she said, they would pity me. And I said, that's an interesting word.
Agree.
I said, what is pity? Is pity a negative word, a positive? Like, what is that? She's like, it's really negative. I said, there's also another word to think about. What about compassion and empathy? So I said, is that a positive or a negative word? She goes, that's actually a positive. I said, do you know the difference? And we were talking about the difference between the two.
Okay.
And then I gave her a dialogue, right? Like if it were to be in reverse, right? And she didn't have the words because she said, what are people going to say to me? What am I going to say back to them? And I said, well, here's how it goes, right? You know what? I know that this happened and I don't know what to say to you. Like I'm at a loss for words because I really care about you and I want to be there to comfort you or say the right thing. And I just don't know what that is.
Sure.
And I don't know. Yeah.
I'm that person, when somebody comes to lay out heavy stuff on me that, I want to be there, just like you said, but also that, I never know what to say, I never know what to do. And I've never had training. I never had anything to even just be like, damn, that sucks, bro. And I don't want to be that person. I just don't want to say that because like when you said being empathetic to a person, I see that as possible because I'm trying to relate and try to help them out as much as possible. Because I feel good about trying to help people. Yeah. But it's just like, I don't want to say it makes me weird.
Well, so that's what she said. She's like, I don't know. So I said, well, what would you say? What would you say back to the person? And you would say, you know what? Thank you so much for reaching out to me.
Yeah.
Right now I'm in a lot of pain and I don't know what I need and I don't know how you can help me. But if it comes a point in time where that's clear to me and I want to share, I know you just gave me a space and an opening so that I could do that. And I really thank you for that. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So it's forging, again, it's not having the right answers, it's forging the relationship. And I said, would you consider the dialogue I just had, is that pitiful or is that compassionate? And she's like, no, that's really compassionate. I said, yeah. And I said to her at the end of our conversation, I said, I want you to know something. I don't pity you. I'm compassionate towards you. I feel really deep compassion towards your pain. And, and again, that was my way of forging the relationship.
Sure.
Because that's her fear. Her fear is that she's going to be pitied. And what does pity mean to her is that she's going to be treated differently. Right? And I said to her, that makes sense. You know why? Because you're a teenager. And a teenager doesn't want to stand out in the crowd. They want to blend. They want to go with the trends. They want to be with the in crowd, right? They want to be like part of the cool group, whatever it is. I said, it's not until adulthood, like when you reach adulthood, where you're like, I want to be unique, right? I want to be my individual self, right? That's when it's really cool to be unique and different, right? But not as a kid. No, 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 no.
Well, I mean, I don't know what it's like being a kid nowadays, but yeah, I mean, I remember being that way that, with the trends and stuff that you wanted to be, like you just said it very well, like you wanted to be the cool kid in class, right? But, but it was one of those things that also that is, I don't want to say it was very narrow or fixed minded, but, able to have a conversation like that with one-on-one, like a really deep compassion. I think, well, I know that I really never had those growing up, it was maybe, it was one of those things that if you were maybe, I hope this is not oversharing, but I never really felt like I had those deep, like, hey, how are you feeling? And why are you feeling this way? Even with my family, I think it was one of those things that, like, why are you feeling that way? Then, well, don't do that. Then it was just,
or don't think and feel that way.
Right. Yeah. And just move on. Yeah. And it's like, well, I'm feeling this way for a reason. I mean, can we at least say something about it? Or, like it just didn't come up, I guess. Right.
Well, Chris, I hate to break the news to you, but that's how parents typically are. And it's not their fault. It's we don't have the language. We don't teach. I mean, one of the things that I always say, right? Because again, the pillars of my book is on acceptance, compassion, and empowerment. We never learn those skills. Like the kind of conversation that I just described to you, nobody teaches you that.
Sure.
When I mean, same thing growing up, when I was upset or frustrated or whatever, nobody said to me, you're not a frustrated little girl. Like, why are you acting so frustrated? What's going on for you, sweetie? They were just like, stop doing that.
Exactly.
And of course, like, I know that I could speak for myself. I felt so invalidated. Like I felt not seen. I just, and when I was upset and I couldn't stop stop the emotions, because I'm an emotive person, as you could tell, right? I'm a deeply emotional person. Guess what? There's something wrong with me. Like, why am I making my parents annoyed with me? And on and on. So that's just self-deprecating. And then I just saw myself as like, right, not enough or not good enough or whatever it is. It's such a vicious cycle. We all find ourselves in that. So like learning these skills and learning those tools and having those conversations are like so important.
Yeah. I mean, there's no manual, I guess, for being a parent. And I'm,
No.
To their defense, I mean, I'm sure they, had a great childhood. I mean, I'm not saying anything bad about it, but they did the best they could. But again, it was little things like that even now, like with you, just the way you saying that, like I would probably, I mean, I don't have any kids. I'm single. I got 2 dogs, but, I would never know to think about, like, I don't know how I would be as a parent, but, that's the reason I like having these conversations, because hopefully that stays in the back of my head that when and if that happens, that, we can actually say, hey, let's talk about it then,
I have 4 kids.
Nice.
And 3 dogs.
Well, you're extremely busy then. Wow.
I could speak from experience.
But, going back though, is most of what you're seeing in your patients, like as far as trauma and anxiety, is that mainly coming from childhood, or is that, maybe genetically there for whatever reason?
That's a really good question. That's a good question.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I have to say it varies from person to person.
Case by case.
Yeah, it really does. I think, it's funny because we say the word trauma and we use that very loosely. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions about it because there's little T's and big T's. I think trauma is relative. Like, in other words, like what I might consider trauma, you may not consider a trauma, right? And what seems like a trauma to you may not seem like a trauma to me. So it really has to do with your own experience with it. Like, did it impact on your functioning? Did it lead to deep emotional pain? Did it impact on the trajectory of your life in some fundamental way? Is it affecting your relationships? Because that's where it tends to like trickle into relationships.
Yeah.
Right. So there's so many ways that it manifests itself. So there's like single incident trauma, which means like something that happens, like this young girl who, like, her father, like, she was talking to me and I said to her, you don't seem like the kind of kid who readily shared your thoughts and feelings before. So she goes, yeah, there was nothing for me to share really. So I said, yeah, you kind of like, you're into sports, you do well academically, nothing, it seems like, of course, there's always social like drama in school, but like nothing, you weren't bullied or anything huge. You know what I mean? I was like, it wasn't a lot to share.
Yeah.
You just kind of went about your day and like talked about with your friends and, socialize, and that was it. Right. But like now you have this going on, and this is something like tremendous, right? But this is a single incident trauma. Do you know what I mean? Like she never had any trauma before
That
in her
makes
childhood. Yeah. So if somebody gets into like a really massive car accident, that's a single incident trauma. There's certain things that happen and pivot on people's lives that are like more single incident. So I work with people who have single incident. I also have something called cumulative trauma, which is trauma over a period of like extensive period of time, which
sense.
makes sense. Yeah. And often you see that with childhood trauma,
Mm, okay.
where somebody was like abused or neglected or, other things.
That just kept going over and over all throughout their life.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, people also compare like what's worse and better, but like I have to say that, whether it's neglect, abuse, all these things affect you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
So,
I agree. I mean, like you said, case by case, that makes perfect sense just because everyone has their own life journey and different childhoods, the environments they grow up in. And there's little things that always stick out, and I've recently learned about, I think somebody called it micro trauma, and I never heard that term before doing these. And it was just like, one time I got left at Disney World. I mean, they didn't mean to do that, but I still remember that. Was that a trauma? I don't think so, but I could see how somebody else would say that was.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. And like, I don't really know where I was going with that point, but that, yeah.
We have flashbacks sometimes.
There we go. That's what I was trying to say. Yeah.
Right? And we get triggered, and we get triggered. We get triggered.
Trying to say.
Yeah. Because I know for myself, like there are certain things that trigger me so much, and I know directly where that hits for me. I could totally identify like what it's hitting for me in the moment.
Hmm.
And sometimes it's so triggering that I'll get activated, right? And I won't be my best self.
Sure.
Right. And that happens to all of us. Right. And then there are other times that I catch it. I'm like, oh, that was like, ugh. I need to really like center myself and ground myself because this is not going to go in a good direction.
Yeah. Is it easy for people to identify those, or is it just kind of
So yes, triggers, part of our triggers could be, it could be anything, that activates us, but it's an activation. So we get triggered in our nervous system.
Okay.
Right. In our bodies.
Okay.
And often we could kind of have a rapid heart rate, or we could have like a racing mind, right? Or we could have like things happen to us when we're in that kind of like flight or fight response.
Yeah. Like sweaty palms or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Or like I said, there's so many different ways it manifests itself. And then also it happens not only with, like I said, in our body, but it also happens in our mind, right? Where we could catastrophize things, or we could, like I said, our mind races, or we could become very fearful, right? Or we could feel very threatened.
Yeah.
Right? Like somebody could do something, and instead of saying, oh, they had a hard time putting away the dishes because they were rushing out the door, they don't care about me because they know that I get really upset when they don't put the dishes away. Right? We kind of just slip into that place.
That makes sense. So when you had these triggers or whatever, I mean, is there a way? I mean, I'm guessing you can never be 100% cured or healed from it all, but is there a way that it gets better through your future? I mean, just talking with like people like yourself and.
Oh yeah, that's what I do all day long.
Yeah, that's what I would think, that eventually that, again, like going back on childhood and, trying to talk about our feelings, and, if something really did happen, it was kind of like you stuff it down here in your stomach and you just never speak about it. But then randomly, I don't know, like a disc breaks and all, you go all to pieces and go all to hell, and it comes out. It's like, because you just stuffed all that stuff down there rather than trying to actually work on these thoughts, feelings, moods, whatever you want to say, experiences, and get them out.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's what you're talking about. It's like disproportionate, right? Like your emotions and the way that you're acting out is disproportionate to what happened to evoke such a like strong, intense reaction.
Okay.
Right? So when that happens, it's a clue. It's actually a cue, right? Like when I'm getting like so activated and it's a little bit disproportionate to what happened, I have to say to myself, like, what is that? That's not this. This is something else.
Yeah, there's another reason that you're really feeling.
Yeah, this is like totally tapping into something for me. Like what that person said to me is not enough to activate me in the way that I'm getting activated right now. So the awareness is so important. And when I say the awareness, it's what you're thinking, your thoughts. Okay. It's how you're feeling, and it's what's going on in your body, and what your impulse is, what you want to be doing about it. Okay. Because we have impulses. I want to punch the person in the face, right? I want to, whatever the case is, right? And we have a choice on how we want to behave. We don't have a choice in how we think and feel, but we do have a choice. I know you're going to be like, yes, I know you. I saw that.
Yeah. I don't know. Well, a question popped in my head, but keep going. Yeah.
Well, people always argue with me about this, just so you know. It's a huge little.
Wait, about like we don't control what we think and feel?
Yes. And everything that I'm saying is actually counter to what you're taught. So I just want to say that too. Okay. Because we're taught that we could transform our thoughts and feelings. And I'm not saying that it can't lead to transformation if you make changes and if you have a different mindset and if you train your mind to take a pause and all the things that we do in order to help ourselves. Mm-hmm. That inevitably could help. It could lower the volume. I call it lowering the volume. But you still can control it. You can't control it. And what people get caught up in is they have thoughts about their thoughts, and then they have thoughts about their feelings, and they have feelings about the feelings, and they have feelings about the thoughts. And I could go on and on and on and on.
Right.
Okay. One of the things I said to this girl, and you may say to me, oh, how did you say that? Right. And I said it in a very, very compassionate, like thoughtful way, is I said, I just want to let you know, and this was like a little psychoeducation. I want to let you know that sometimes when there's deaths or we lose people, there's a lot of guilt that comes up with that and a lot of shame. And I said to her, I was once working with somebody. I was once working with a man, and one of his children died. And he was riddled with shame. And you know what he said to me? He said, why that kid? Why that kid? And what he was really saying, right, which he admitted in our session, is that sometimes he says to himself, like, that was his like prized child, like the child that was like successful and good looking and good in sports, and like so
yeah.
And the child that he felt most connected to. And there was this thought, like, why did it have to be him? Why couldn't it have been some like one of the other kids? Sure. And he was so shameful that he even had that thought, And this is what I'm saying. He couldn't help it. That's just a thought. Sure. It doesn't mean anything, right? And so I said to her, like, the reason I'm telling you this is you had a real connection to your dad. Your dad was a stay-at-home dad, etc. Like, and I know your relationship with your mom because you shared that with me. It's not a farce to like say, oh gosh, why did it have to be him? And like, I kind of wish it was her, and I said, you might not have had that thought at all for that matter, but I'm saying if you did, that's okay too. Because I wanted her to know whether, because in case she does, like, I want her to know that that's okay. And that she's not a bad person because she had like a mean thought.
Yeah. Yeah. I get it. Well, not specifically, but that when you put it that way, like, in movies and stuff that I've watched or whatever, that, of course I can't relate to it personally, but yeah, in that sense, you always see like the kid that, who exactly like you described, the A+ student, captain of the whatever team and stuff. And then something bad happens. And it was like, the guy looks up to God and it's like, why, why did you take him and not the other one? And that makes perfect sense because it's one of those environmental factors that, when you were talking about, you can't control what you think and feel, that I guess that never really happens or you never think that until it actually something to that scenario happens. And then you're like, oh shit.
Well, not necessarily.
Oh,
not necessarily. Because we all have very irrational, mean-spirited, aggressive thoughts and feelings at times. You don't?
No, I agree. I agree with that.
I do.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
I sometimes think I want to punch somebody in the face.
I know that too. Yeah.
Sure. I'm admitting it. You know what? When I'm in my mindfulness class, one of the things I say to my students all the time, I say to them, and again, it's New York, right? I said, did you ever have like a thought like you wanted to push somebody over the train tracks, or like be in the middle of a family dinner and scream out loud, right? And like totally scream and like curse or something. And they all like giggle and they look at me and they're all like, right. Right.
Well, you're
And
not supposed to say that out loud, right? So that's where you
that's
bad,
it.
bad.
But I say to them, there's a difference between the person who thinks it and the person who acts out on it.
Mm.
But all thoughts and feelings are okay. They're all okay. And that's a big load. When I express that to somebody, like I could see that that is so comforting to hear, that they don't have to be riddled with these guilt and, thoughts around their thoughts and feelings, because our thoughts and feelings could be very mean spirited. And just because you have a mean thought doesn't mean you're a mean person.
Sure.
Just because you have an envious thought doesn't mean you're a jealous person. We leap, we kind of say that, and a way to prove that to you, okay, is this is like such a fascinating thing. When I ask people to like think about like, the most horrendous, horrible, painful thing that ever happened to them, and to kind of bring up that painful feeling, people could readily tap into that to some extent. They can remember what that felt like, but if I ask them to tap into the most joyful, like exciting thing, you can't readily tap into that feeling. You can't. And that's because we have a negativity bias, and we also, our memories hold on to negativity and pain. That's what our bodies, that's how we're equipped. Why? Because of a protective mechanism.
Ah, that makes sense.
That's right. Right.
But
That's why those memories come up for you, by the way.
yeah, now I guess that's a great point, because it's so easy when, now that I'm thinking about it, that all the more negative ones or painful ones come up first, more than me actually sitting here. Like, when I was talking about Disney World, that's the first thing I remember. Hey, I got lost, and I remember I was 5 years old, crying my eyes out, ecstatic. And yeah, because like it was one of those things, like, not to change the subject, but my parents were so worried about losing me there, because I was a little kid just running around and everything, and they're like, hey, if you don't stay with us, you're going to get captured, somebody's going to take you. And then I got lost. I was like, oh no, I'm gone, like forever.
Yes. Yeah.
Great point. And I'm glad you said that thoughts and feelings are okay. And and again, this might switch gears here a little bit, but I follow a couple of comedians on their podcast and listen to them talk and stuff, and they go through a lot of a different, I don't want to say trauma, but a lot of different thoughts and feelings. And, they talk about depression and things like that. And one of them things, like, she was talking about how this one comedian that, she suffers from depression, so to speak. And that, a lot of people like to say that they're depressed just because they had a bad day, and they're like, or something didn't go right. Right. Like somebody cut them off in traffic, or they got their order wrong. Like, oh, life is so, terrible. And like, but it's like, no, you don't. And that her point was that you don't really know what depression is that I have these thoughts and feelings where I'm just driving down the road and it's kind of like, I just want to kill myself or something like that.
Or I hope a car hits me.
Exactly. Yeah. Something just random and like, completely like how we were saying, like you should never say out loud, because you did say out that loud, people are like, well, you need to go see somebody, or there's something wrong with you. And that is like, and it just, and like when I start talking and get on here, I always, and I've said this a couple of times, I always seem to think like things are okay, right? Like, hey, just stop doing whatever you're doing. If you think it's bad, then just stop doing it. But it's really not that easy.
It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and like, and I was really naive, and I forgot that, like how, and I have a really friend who opened up to me about an addiction problem, and that, when we were talking, I was kind of like, just don't do that anymore. Then, dude, it's easy, right? But it's not. And I was like, I tried to put myself in his shoes after we got done talking. It's like, but yeah, his brain just is wired differently than mine.
That's exactly right. Right. And you said that you're very involved in fitness.
Oh yeah. That's my thing when I'm not full time.
Yes. Yeah. And I am too. I mean, yeah, I am too. And I've been working out for over 30 years, but, I consider myself, and you probably do, like I'm a very disciplined person, right?
I have to be. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm a very regimented person. And usually if you're very consistent with your exercise and health, et cetera, you tend to be like more type A, discipline, routine, type of person.
Yep.
So, people also, they always say to me, like, how do you do that? Like they don't, cause I'm like, I don't really digress. Like when I go to a restaurant, like I will pick apart my meal, like, and I'll say, does it have this? Does it have this? Could I have a substitution of this and this? Like it's a joke. They make fun of me, but, and I do that every time. I don't do it just sometimes. Right. And I say to them, like, this, but not everyone's, but they go, how come it's so hard for me? Like, why is it that you could keep up with that behavior? Right. And for me, it's like, I do it for 2 weeks and then like, there's no consistency.
No.
It's what you're saying, you know, it's, we're all wired differently.
Mm.
And sometimes our brain and our mind can be so self-defeating
Hmm.
because it rationalizes and it avoids, right? And it justifies. And I could talk about all the things that our mind does, but it does it to a different extent and a different level for different people. So, if you have a very like avoidant, like say mind, right? And there's a reason for that. You weren't born that way, right? For sure. Um, it's going to be harder for you. And you do have to put more of an effort into it where something else might be easier for you than it is for me. So it's really like that place of acceptance of who you are and really studying yourself, and really understanding who you are and appreciating it and seeing yourself as worthy and enough in every single day and every single thing that you do consistently. And you're building up your confidence and you're putting something in the bucket. So one thing about working out, which I so love, and I have 4 kids, like I said, and I'm so thankful because I've always modeled to them over the years health and fitness and right.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and they all prescribe to it at some level. It's so fascinating. But one of my sons, my second oldest son, he's in like really amazing shape, and he works out, and he's like buff and whatever. And like, but it was so cute because he came home over the summer, and he said to me, like we were talking about it, and he said to me, "I feel so good about myself."
Nice.
Like he's like in front of the mirror flexing, and another person would be like, why are you flexing, like what's wrong with you? And I'm like, I love that you're so proud of yourself. Like this is so cool. Stand in front of the mirror all day if you want to, be my guest. But I was like, doesn't it make you, when you look at your body and you put effort into it,
For sure. That's exactly
like
what I was thinking right there.
don't you feel so good about yourself,
Exactly. Yeah.
like day in and day out?
Yeah. It's a whole new, maybe a whole new confidence. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say, that, you roll
Yes.
your shoulders back, just like your son was saying. It's just like you said, you put this much work into something. It's like one of the only things that you can see the results and what you're getting out of it to a certain big, and it doesn't have to be physical. I mean, not only, I have mental, what's the word of my benefits from it, that just like, I love getting there and working out. It clears my mind. It helps my mind go at ease. And that, and being, I used to be one of these people who avoided hard stuff, like even growing up and
Mhm.
high school and even college, I took PE as my bachelor's, and, it's just, and not, I don't know, for some reason I just thought it was, I don't know, at the time I thought it was be good for me, and it was, but I was like, even though that's all the lesson plans I had to do and stuff like that, I would do it the easiest way I could, no matter what. And until one of these things that went in my head, I don't know what happened, but I said, hey, I got to start, going down the hard road sometimes. And, if I want to be at the top of my game, if I want to reach certain levels, that,
Mhm.
this is what you got to do. You got to get yourself out of that comfort zone and be in the,
Right.
yeah. And then you get your mind out of this whole, habit that you're in. And like, and I used to think routines were weird, and that for I guess I had Peter Pan syndrome, right? That,
Uh-huh.
they for grownups, I don't need a routine, but I heard a good quote once that, great athletes are governed by routine. And that meant so much to me. And that changed a whole lot of the way, like as far as self-discipline. And, now I'm training for a half marathon. It's like, I was like, well, I can't just go out there and run it. I want to actually train for it and to do well.
Yeah. So it's so interesting you say that because I have a Michael Jordan quote in my book.
Nice.
So he talks a lot about failure.
Mm-hmm.
And the quote, without quoting it because I can't remember it, but it was a pretty long quote, but he talks about like every time he failed, that is what helped him to succeed.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's all about, and I always say this. Do you think like a professional athlete, do they, they practice for many hours, don't they?
Sure.
Do you think when they reach that status, like as being professional and they're like in the best shape of their life, they say, "Oh, I'm good. I don't need to practice. I'm good." No,
Yeah.
like just
Some of
because,
them might, but that's where you find out the difference in like
yes,
yeah.
yeah, right. So just because we reach in a certain plateau or like a summit or a peak, that doesn't mean we just stop. Like we keep going, and going, whether it's to maintain or whether it's to like enhance and grow and move beyond.
Yeah,
There's never an ending point. There's never ever an ending point to our growth.
I
So
agree.
that's like physical, mental, emotional, in every single way. Like it's endless. It could be growing forever. Well, we should be growing forever.
No, I've had a couple, or well, not a couple, more than a couple humbling experiences, through my CrossFit competitions that I do and stuff. And I actually learned that, oh, there's levels to this, and that gives me some motivation, and it makes me want to, like, hey, what is that person doing compared to that I'm not doing? And then that's when I started learning, okay, that's why they're at this level and I'm only at this level. How do I get to that? And,
Mm-hmm.
and some people, I guess, kind of what we were talking about earlier, would instantly just say like, oh, well, I'll never be that, or I can never do that. But, I mean, and then there might be an argument, does hard work beat talent, and like, well, I guess we can argue that a bunch of different ways. But
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a matter of just that, if you really want to do something, that, hey, block out all the mechanisms, screw all the haters. I know your mind like will try to tell you not to do something, but you just got to get in there. And if you really want something out of it, that
Mm-hmm.
do it. And just like you said, that, when you see the results, that what you did on your own, that's so satisfying. You see those results, and I don't want to say it becomes an addiction, but you're just like, man, this is what it's about.
But it feels good. Like if you could connect to that, on a real deep visceral level. And I think, I'm going to say it's noticing it though.
That's a good way to say it. Yeah.
Yeah, because we do things all day long that are worthy of noticing, and
Mhm.
we don't pay attention to it. I think that's the point, and I find personally, like just the story that I was just telling you before about like giving permission to this like young girl, right? And giving her space, to kind of, you know, be safe and communicate. And I even said to her, like, you may not talk about like what's going on for you anywhere in your life, with your friends, with your parents, with your mom, with whatever. But like here, this is a safe space and you could say whatever you want or not say anything at all. And both are cool with me, you know? But like I after the session and before I got on with you, I literally took a minute and I sat here and I closed my eyes and I took that in, because it was such a deep connected experience for me. And I felt like I shared something with her. I gave her a gift
Yeah,
that she could walk away with. But I also wanted to acknowledge that for myself
you should. I agree.
and that connection. But these things happen all the time. That's what I'm saying. Right? Whether it's like
And that you,
whether it's smiling at somebody, who had a rough day, or
mm,
whether it's holding the door open for somebody, or whether it's calling a friend, in need, or again, there's so many things we do every moment of every day that we don't pay attention to that contribute to our self-confidence. And it just kind of goes over our head.
yeah, no, I agree. I'm glad you put it that way, because, I always say that I'm living off momentum. And again, going back to COVID, that it's kind of when things came to a halt for me. I was like, hey, let me reevaluate some things. Let me see how life is, like, am I really doing what I want to do?
Yeah.
What are my goals? What are we doing here? But, to your point, like right there, that's that so many things like that go, and I don't even notice them until like somebody will either say something or like, well, thanks for saying that. And then,
Mhm.
or like, or if you hold a door open for somebody or whatever, it's just because I even notice that too, when, like if I'm walking across the street or like I'm walking in right before or right after somebody, I'm like, oh, they didn't even hold the door open for me. Come on.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
it's just like, yeah, like, I guess because life is going by so fast and you have so many other different things you're thinking about in that
Mhm.
basis, you don't really stop and smell the roses. I know it's kind of a cliche thought, but yeah.
No, it is. It's so funny. Like whenever you're walking around and people are trying to take pictures, right? So one person is always out of the picture because somebody has to be taking the picture.
Sure.
But I'm always the person that I'll go over. I literally like I will go over and I'll say, "Do you want to be in the picture? I'm happy to take the picture."
Nice.
I, always, I really do because I'm so conscious of that. Like,
Yeah.
and people are. I can't even tell you. It's like I just gave them like I don't know an award or something when I say that. Like they're like so shocked. They're like, "That's so nice. Like, thank you so much." But those things again fill my bucket
Mm.
where I could then say to myself, I am thoughtful, I am caring, I am considerate, I am aware, I'm compassionate. And I say that when there are moments that I put myself in those positions, I acknowledge it. I put it out there.
Good.
And not in a way to like glorify myself, because that's not really about it. It's more about like, I want to feel this, so I do more of it, because
Yeah.
that's who I want to be. That's like how I want to represent myself.
I love that.
Yes.
And well,
Okay.
Dr. Michelle, I think I want to be respectful for your time. So I think
Yeah,
we can
thank
take
you.
it
So
there.
could I show you my new book?
Yeah, I was going to say, if you want to plug your book, if you want to plug anything, if people want to find you.
So this is my new book. It's called Ace Your Life, Unleash Your Best Self and Live the Life You Want. And it's predicated on the pillars of acceptance, compassion, and empowerment.
Gotcha.
Okay. So if you want the skills and tools that we're talking about, okay, to really cultivate this in your life, this is the book to help you do it. Okay. It's coming out on September 20th. I don't know when this is going to air. And you could get it on any, bookstores like Barnes and Noble, Amazon, thrift stores, Walmart, etc. And then my website, is Michelle Maidenberg, which is my name. Michelle is 2 L's. Maidenberg is MAIDENBERG .com. If you want to find me, and I'm on all social media, the typical ones. So, and I also do YouTube videos. I do guided meditations as well.
Nice.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you. This was awesome.
Yeah. It was so nice meeting you, and thank you for having me on.
Very welcome. And yeah, down the road, maybe we'll do it again or something.
Okay.
Cool.
Nice to meet you, Chris.
Okay. Bye, folks. We're out of here.